16 fantasy football. We're talking semifinals of a lot of fantasy football playoff runs. As always, I am Luke Reimer here with Flurry Sports, here to talk about some fantasy matchups this coming week, here to talk about some streamers, some droppable players, some guys to help you get to that championship that you are looking forward to. Um, with that being said, the first thing I have to talk about is happy NBA Cup night, everybody. Championship. We are in the midst of a championship between the San Antonio Spurs and the New York Knicks. Um, so we're at a really good point in the sports season, right? Right? Who cares about the NBA Cup? Well, I don't disagree. Who really cared about NBA regular season before Christmas? Now I guess we kind of got something to care about as a Bucks fan. You know, it's kind of sad to see the Bucks not be able to defend the championship. But we'll always have that 2023 or 2024 NBA Cup championship. Add that to the banner, add that to the list of championships. Third ring, some people are calling it. But shout out the Spurs, shout out the Knicks. Should be a good one. I don't necessarily know that the Spurs are in a position where they can win a championship this year, but the Knicks are. It looks like they're right on the precipice. If they make a run at someone at the trade deadline, I would imagine that something they could make a run to the NBA championship and kind of break that curse. With that being said, that's enough basketball. Let's get right into football. So week 16, as I said off the bat, we are looking at probably semifinals in most people's fantasy football leagues. Um, so at this point in the season, I talked about it last week, but at this point, you kind of have a solid team already, right? You kind of know what your team is. You're going to continue to ride the guys that got you here. But there's always some room to kind of tinker with that with your team. You don't want to make any drastic things change. But as we look at positions like running backs, your two running back, your two wide receivers in a basic one quarterback, two running back, two wide receiver, one tight end, one flex, maybe in a kicker. Your running backs and wide receivers are probably set. You probably riding those guys that got you there. Quarterback, you probably have an idea on. Tight end could be a toss up, but your flex position, I think, is really one that comes to mind when we talk about guys who can we fill in to kind of win leagues, right? We've seen this in the past where, like even last year with the Titans, they finished as the worst team in the NFL, ending up with the one seed or with the number one pick. Um, we saw Tajay Spears kind of, turn it on at the end of the year, and I'm sure he won, some people their leagues last year. Like, who are those guys that we can put up? We saw Jerick McKinnon a couple of years ago. Obviously, that was with the very good Chiefs team, but really he kind of broke out in the end of the year there. Like Austin Eckler is another guy like that who kind of came off of his down, coming on in his down years with the Chargers. Kind of jumped up to the top there at the end of the season to win people fantasy championships. So I have a couple names here that we can talk about, especially for the flex position. The first guy that really comes to my mind is Michael Carter with the Arizona Cardinals. We saw Bam Knight get, he left the game last week against the Falcons after one snap, which ended up, coming to be a sprained ankle, which led him in IR. So while injuries are, one of the worst things about sports, whenever there's an injury, there breeds opportunity, right? So when we're looking at this Arizona backfield, there is going to be a starting running back out on your waiver wire right now that you need to look forward to. And the first guy that comes up on that list is Michael Carter, right? He came in and immediately saw, the majority of the rushing attempts for Arizona. Comes in with 14 rushes or 13 rushes and finishes with 94 yards. There's not really much of a competition there when we're looking at who is going to be the Cardinals, number one guy moving forward. We have Amari DiMercato there, who's for the name and the hype surrounding him this year. He's been used more of a change of pace kind of guy, right? He's been used in the pass game a lot more than he's been used in the run game. So it's really hard to me to believe that he's going to come in and be, the early down work guy, the when you need rushing yards, that kind of guy. Then we have Corey Kiner, who's an undrafted rookie who we don't really know anything about. You're not going to feel confident starting him. So it really feels like Michael Carter is the guy who's going to step in and be that, that running back one in this Arizona Cardinals offense. So that brings in a question like, does it even matter, right? With how bad the Cardinals are, they're out of playoff contention. They're not really playing for anything. Like, why would you even look at going for the Cardinals? I'll say that looking ahead, there's two incredible matchups for the Cardinals moving forward for the run game. They take on Atlanta, who's giving up about 17 fantasy points per game to running backs, which is a little closer to more than the middle of the pack, but it's definitely a defense that you can run on. And then we're coming in the championship against the Cincinnati Bengals, who are like historically becoming one of the worst defenses, at least in recent memory. They're giving up 24 and a half fantasy points per game to running backs. That's by far the number one most in the NFL this season. So in ESPN leagues, Michael Carter is only owning like 9.8% of leagues, something like that, 9.2. He's out there. He's available for you. He's getting starting running back run. He's getting touches. He's got two great matchups. That feels like an incredible flex play if you're looking for someone to really solidify your lineup the rest of the way. Especially given that Jacoby Brissett is not much of a run threat on his own, right? That's kind of a difference than we've seen with Kyler Murray. So like breaking it down, there's really nobody that's taken away from, Michael Carter's work here in the run game. So I really like Michael Carter moving forward. He's a great pass catcher. He's a great pass blocker. So he's going to be on the field a lot more often than Amari DiMercado and Corey Kiner collectively. So if you're looking for that diamond in the rough, like I said, we're getting to the point of the season where diamond in the roughs aren't really that big of an issue right now. It's probably not your number one priority. But if you're someone out there who could use just that extra oomph, that extra shot to the arm of your offense, like it's really hard for me to say that Michael Carter is not a player that can fill that role. And of course, when we're talking about guys that you can pick up, like the bench is that might be the number one thing when we go from regular season to the playoffs is, what is the strategy with the bench. So the strategy, right? You bench guys that you have 50-50 shots on, and, guys who can work themselves into the lineup, like those guys don't really matter anymore, right? At this point, you're just trying to, build a bench that's going to help you in any catastrophe that you can foresee. So whether that be picking up, multiple defenses to, start this week and next week to block someone from picking them up. Same thing with kickers, maybe even same thing with quarterbacks. Then you're doing handcuffs. So there's really no point in really owning those 50-50 guys anymore, right? One name that comes to my mind that I don't really think he needs to be owned. I think he's owned in like about 81% of sleeper leagues is Xavier Worthy. Xavier Worthy has not had a double digit. Has had one double digit game this year. He's had one game where he scored a touchdown. Given that Patrick Mahomes is out for the season, the Chiefs are out of playoff contention. Worthy is probably a bigger part of their future than he is for the present. It doesn't really feel like there's an opportunity for Worthy to kind of break out the rest of this year. So if you're dropping Xavier Worthy, I'm totally in favor of that. We saw him come on at the end of the last year, given his big playability, but a lot of that came as short yardage as a rushing kind of guy. He has two rushes in the last 5 games, two combined rushes the last 5 games. He has 4 games with zero rushes in those 5 games. So that's certainly not a spot where we're looking for trick plays to happen. Given Rashee Rice and Travis Kelsey work so well at that middle and the intermediate part of the field, there's really not a spot for Xavier Worthy to kind of factor into this offense in terms of fantasy football production. I think he's a really good player for the Chiefs in general when we talk about real life football, but for fantasy football projections, I don't know that Xavier Worthy is a guy that needs to be owned anymore in fantasy leagues. Looking ahead or looking let's go to the speaking about the tight end position. Another guy who has seemingly, come out of the clouds here, has been Colby Parkinson. Um, Over the last since week 9, he finishes tight end 43 against the New Orleans Saints. Since then, he has finishes of tight end 7, tight end 9, tight end 4, tight end 26, tight end 10, and tight end 4. So the one thing that we know about the Rams is they love running, the 2 3 tight end personnel. Colby Parkinson is on the field a lot. He's a great blocker, and at this point in the season, he's really becoming that guy who's going to step into a receiving role. He has 17 targets over the last 3 games. He has sorry, I'm just trying to do some quick math here. He has 12 receptions over the last 3 games, and he's 3 touchdowns over the last 3 games. Actually, 3 touchdowns over the last 2 games. He had two last week. If the Rams are in a situation, they're on a short week, and we know how good of a player Devontae Adams is in the red zone. I don't necessarily know he's going to be 100%. Even if he plays, I don't necessarily know that he plays. Who is going to be that guy to continue that red zone usage? It really feels like it's going to be Colby Parkinson. Not that Puka Nakua is not a good player. We know that Kyron Williams is going to get rushes. But when the Rams pass in the red zone, it's going to be Colby Parkinson. Has to be one of the better looks. T-Bomb, how's it going? Welcome back in the chat. Let me know if you got any questions. And as I see some more people coming in the chat here, please drop some questions. Here to help you answer any questions you have. Here to talk ball. Here to really talk about anything. We're just talking ball on a Tuesday night. Nothing better as we kind of wind down the fantasy season, as we kind of wind down the NFL season. It was kind of a fun week last week, right? I would imagine that a lot of people probably got knocked out with players that they thought would get them in. We didn't really have any of the huge performances from the big dogs, right? We had solid performances from guys like Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, but we didn't have those performances that we wanted them to carry us to a championship. Um, so I think this is a really interesting week. I'm curious for anyone watching, if you have any questions, please let me know. If you're alive in the semifinals, let me know who got you there. What was your big week last week? And like I said, we're just here to talk ball. But talking about Colby Parkinson, I mentioned with the Devontae Adams injury, someone needs to kind of step up and be that receiving weapon in the red zone, and that feels like Colby Parkinson has. You never really want to chase points in fantasy football, but 3 touchdowns, just over 100 yards over the last 2 weeks on 8 receptions is nothing to scoff at, especially if you're someone who doesn't really have a tight end position locked up. So looking to Colby Parkinson as a guy who you can fit in. He's probably he's definitely a top 12 tight end probably the rest of the season for me, which is a starter in any fantasy league. Another tight end that probably should be owned is Darren Waller. Again, you're chasing points in this, but it's not really a situation where Darren Waller kind of came out of the clouds here. Like we've seen him work in this Dolphins offense before he went down with that injury. Um, 2 touchdowns last week in a game that Pittsburgh kind of dominated in the cold. Um, she is the number one receiving option in the red zone, and that's nothing out of the ordinary for a Mike McDaniel offense in the red zone, right? We saw Jonnu Smith kind of come alive. As a guy who probably helped a lot of people win fantasy championships last year, right? Tight ends do get design plays to him, especially big receiving threats like Jonnu Smith was. That very well fits into what Darren Waller is here in Miami. Now I do like him more with Tua than I do with Zach Wilson or Quinn Ewers, as Miami's mulling over a quarterback change. But moving forward, like if you're expecting anyone on this Dolphins offense, which other than last week has been moving the ball well, and I guess that's been a lot due to the run game and Devon Achane. But other than Devon Achane, it really feels like Darren Waller is the next guy who is going to be that touchdown scorer. Other guys to look for this week for streamers. Kirk Cousins has been slinging the ball around a little bit lately. Um, 373 passing yards against Tampa Bay last week, which was number one in the league. Got a great matchup with the Arizona Cardinals this week. I know this is not a situation where you are going to feel comfortable with starting Kirk Cousins, but if you're in a bind and you're like, how did I even get here? Maybe you were a Patrick Mahomes owner, who's like Kirk Cousins is definitely a guy who can fit in with a really good matchup against the Arizona Cardinals here. Other players to look at. I talked about Michael Carter for running backs. Wide receiver is an interesting one. I don't know that you're in a position like I think Michael Carter is probably the number one flex pickup we have the rest of the week. And here, wait, let's before we get to that, let's talk some ball with T-Bomb here. Need some help for the ship. Should I pick up Jaden Reed for Rome Odunze and start him over Waddle, JJ, or Egbuka? Obviously, I think Rome is fine to drop given the injuries. Especially with the championship coming up, you're not confidently starting Rome. So looking forward, I don't love Jaden Reed moving forward as Christian Watson does not his injury does not sound like it's anything horrible. It actually sounds like he might play this week. Um, let me look up some matchups here for you. T bomb the the Miami Dolphins with Waddle take on the Cincinnati Bengals. That's my immediate thought right away. It's hard to really trust Justin Jefferson right now. Um, Minnesota has the Giants, which theoretically should be a good matchup. That's what I said with the Cowboys too, and that was not a good matchup for Justin Jefferson. I think you need to sit Justin Jefferson the rest of the way, right? He has what 13 fantasy points over 3 games or whatever it is. And at this point for Ibuka, this feels like this is a must-win game for either Tampa Bay and Carolina. I do think that Tampa, kind of what we saw last game, was a must-win game that they ended up losing. But they really peppered Mike Evans with targets that Bucky Irving didn't really get going, but he was part of that offense. Sean Tucker's getting red zone, so I think Waddle is the pick for me this week. With as I said about talking about Michael Carter with that Cincinnati Bengals defense, that is one of the worst defenses in the NFL in recent memories. And T Bomb, if you just hold tight real quick, I do have stats up of most points given up to receivers by fantasy teams. And I'm looking for the Bengals here. So the Bengals been all right against receivers. But if we're, with this Miami offense, right? Jalen Waddle feels like he's the guy. He's the between the 20s guy, the go-to guy. Over his last couple of games, Jalen Waddle has finished wide receiver 48, not great, wide receiver 10, which is good against a good Jets pass defense, and then wide receiver 72 against bad Pittsburgh. Like Miami is still in must-win mode, right? They're not totally out of the playoffs yet, so I think Waddle is probably a factor in that. I do like Waddle more than I like Jaden Reed this week. So if you're making me choose, give me Jalen Waddle. Stay tuned though, T Bomb. Zach will have his fantasy rankings out. I think tomorrow. Take a look at that. I think you're fine picking up Reed for Rome. I think if you want Reed on your team, that's an absolutely great move because again, you're not starting Rome the rest of the season. And as I said before, when talking about our benches, like if we're not confidently starting anyone, there's really no reason to have them on your team anymore. G, welcome in, brother. It's good to have you. Start three: Hampton, Marks, Javante, Bucky, or Dowdle. I think I'm starting Rico against Tampa. I'm starting Javante. Just looking up who the Cowboys play against the Chargers. I'm starting Dowdle. I'm sitting Woody Marks. No, uh, I'm starting Dowdle. I'm starting Bucky. I'm starting Javante Williams. Um, G, I'm curious about your team. Let me like I assume one of them's for a flex. Do you have any wide receivers that go up against that flex? Let me know. Just looking at some matchups that we can kind of take advantage of this week. Going back to that Bengals game, or talking about just to finish my thought on Darren Waller here. He does play Cincinnati, who's absolutely horrible against tight ends. I think it might be the worst ever, to be honest. If not, it's close. Cincinnati, the Bengals are giving up 14 and a half points to tight ends this season, giving up 15 touchdowns. They've given up 1,276 yards, and all their team has given up 1,000 yards to tight ends. So Darren Waller is a must start for me this week. He's a must pick up, must start as we move forward. Pulling you up. Two running backs, two flex. I have Christian McCaffrey. Okay, so you're starting McCaffrey. Okay, so I'm starting McCaffrey. I'm starting Dowdle. I am starting. Sorry, G. I'm just pulling that up again. Wide receivers are Tet, Rice, and Marvin Harrison. Only start two, so I start Rice and Tet there. Correct. Running backs this week, you're starting McCaffrey, right? I think you're starting Bucky, and I think you're starting Javante. So I like Dowdle's matchup against Tampa Bay. I don't love Woody Marks against the Raiders. I don't love Amari and Hampton against Dallas. So yeah, I'm especially with Kamani Vidal still available. So just going back, sorry G for the confusion. To lock it in for you, Chris McCaffrey is one running back, right? Then I'm starting Bucky Irving as my running back two. I'm starting Dowdle as a flex, and then I'm starting Javante Williams. Those are my four. Those are the guys who've been good all year. Bucky not included, but we know what Bucky is. But those are the guys that are going to get that are going to move you forward the rest of the way. Um, I so T-Bomb, I like Adani um, over Jaden Reed, um, but looking at, I think Waddle is a play here. I think Waddle probably finishes as a top 20 guy this week. Miami has to win. They have to give the best players the ball. So I do like Adani over Jaden. No, I like Jaden Reed over Adani Mitchell. I'm sorry, I like Jaden Reed over Adani Mitchell. I'm dropping Roma Dunze for Jaden Reed if you want to make a move. Quarterback this week from Jordan Love, 1283. Welcome, Jordan Love. You're having a good season. I'm a Packer fan, so it's nice to have you. Quarterbacks, Joe Burrow, Matt Stafford. I am starting Joe Burrow against Miami. We saw what Aaron Rodgers did against Miami last week. And, I'm as big of an Aaron Rodgers fan as you'll ever find in this world. Um, prime Aaron Rodgers would have 400 yards, 4 touchdowns on this game. I'm not saying that Joe Burrow is prime Aaron Rodgers. But, Cincinnati, coming off a zero last week is in for let's just go in, do what we do best and beat the shit out of a team. So give me Burrow this week. um I don't really like Stafford on a short week against Seattle. um Especially without Devontae Adams too, if he doesn't play. PPR wide receiver two and flex. So he has Mike Evans, Michael Wilson, DK, Pittman, Sutton, Watson. You're starting Mike Evans as a wide receiver, and you are starting Michael Wilson, especially if Marvin Harrison continues to be out. If Marvin Harrison is playing, then I'm starting Cortland Sutton against. I'm sorry, Cortland Sutton um, against Jacksonville, who's been bad against the pass this year. So just to recap that, Mike Evans, Michael Wilson, if Marvin Harrison's not playing, if Marvin Harrison is playing, Cortland Sutton. Rank Goff, Purdy, Brissett. I assume you're talking about for this week. If you're putting a gun to my head and I have to pick one of these guys, I am starting Brissett versus Atlanta. I'm sorry, I'm starting Purdy. I'm starting Purdy against Indianapolis. No Sauce Gardner there. I think George Kittle probably sees a big day. Give me Purdy, then Goff. Give me Purdy, Brissett, Goff. Purdy, Brissett, Goff is what I'm doing. Falcons or Chiefs defense this week. Chiefs. I like Chiefs a lot against Tennessee. I think that this is the Chiefs aren't going to win games because of their offense moving forward. They're going to have to win games because of the defense. Not that they want to win games because they're out of the playoffs, but I think this Chiefs team is a lot better than what the record ended up being. So give me the Chiefs against Tennessee. For what it's worth, Atlanta has Arizona this week. We've seen Jacoby Brissett be able to pass. It's not like Arizona's not going to be able to be helpless moving the ball. So give me the Chiefs. Other defenses that might be worth a look this week. New Orleans versus the Jets. We just saw Jacksonville absolutely destroy the Jets. New Orleans defense has actually been playing well for as bad as New Orleans is. I like Tampa Bay against Carolina this week. I think Bryce Young throws the ball up in the air a couple times. I think the Giants are able to kind of tee off on JJ McCarthy a little bit. I think Minnesota's offensive line has really, not helped JJ McCarthy's development in his rookie season. So I think that strong Giants front seven should be able to get to JJ McCarthy. Miami against Cincinnati is an interesting play because that ball's gonna be up in the air. But I don't think you're doing that because we know what Joe Burrow is. We know what he can do. And I think it's a big bounce back game for him. Green Bay is an interesting one at Chicago. Green Bay was able to kind of get to Caleb Williams 2 weeks ago, got an interception, got to him. Without Micah Parsons, it's gonna be hard to rely on those points for sacks. Rashawn Gary is just not the player that everyone thought he was going to be. And other than that, no Packer has a sack over has a sack total over 2. And they're just I know that they're just not really forcing turnovers. Some Bo Nix kind of shred them. I think Green Bay is actually probably droppable moving forward without Micah Parsons. Um, and if you're interested in Packers talk and where the Packers are at, how does the Micah Parsons injury affect them? Tune in tomorrow. We have our Packers show. We'll give you everything you need to know with the Packers. They're going to be a playoff team, but what does that really matter if you lose top five player in the NFL? I'll give my thoughts on that tomorrow. But other matchups to kind of look at for fantasy relevance. The Texans have a 14-point spread over the Raiders, and the game's only 38.5. That's kind of crazy. So the Texans blow them out in a low scoring game. I don't love Woody Marks in this game because I think Texans can pass. I kind of like CJ Stroud a lot. If you're a guy who's like maybe you're in a two quarterback league, and you're between Stroud and somebody else, like I think Stroud's definitely a play. I think Detroit gets it done against Pittsburgh this week. I think Detroit kind of bounces back. I know that they had kind of what we've seen Detroit be the last couple weeks, even though they lost to the Rams. I don't think Pittsburgh has the firepower that the Rams do on offense. I think Detroit wins that game. And I think the line should be able to run the ball. I'm expecting a big week from Jahmyr Gibbs this week. It doesn't feel like he's going 2 weeks in a row, with outscoring a touchdown at least. The Monday night game is really interesting because I think both tight ends fare pretty well with George Kittle and Tyler Warren. Philip Rivers is going to be starting. We know that Philip Rivers will throw to tight ends, right? Antonio Gates kind of made a career with Philip Rivers. I know Tyler Warren didn't have the greatest run last week, but is that a new quarterback, new tight end connection that needs to be worked out? That's something that really can happen this week. So I like Tyler Warren for a bounce back week this week. Wilson, one running back, one wide receiver and one running back PPR. Pickens, Evans, or Sutton, and Bucky worried about Bowles, Harvey, or Pollard. I am worried about Bulls too, but Tampa is in a must-win situation. Usually, when you're in must-win situations, you give the ball to your best player, right? And I guess other than Mike Evans, I think Bucky Irving is probably the best player on this Tampa offense. I think Bucky's a top 10 guy this week. I don't think you need to be worried about Bucky Irving. So I'm picking Bucky Irving for my running back, especially with the PPR. Baker's not afraid to throw him the ball, and we know how good after the catch Bucky is. For wide receivers, I do think George Pickens has sort of a bounce back game against the Chargers. It's hard to imagine he goes another game with 3 receptions for 20 yards or whatever he had. I do like Mike Evans this week though against Carolina. I know that if you're worried about Bulls and this Tampa Bay offense, then I'm going Pickens over Evans. But I think you're fine if you do Evans and Bucky. But in terms like if you're making me out of these three, I think Sutton sees the most. I think Sutton sees the most receptions. I think Evans sees the most work. I think Pickens is probably the safest play. I think he's got the highest floor, but probably the lowest ceiling. So I guess gun to my head, I'm gonna do Pickens and Bucky. And as always, keep dropping your questions. If you guys have any thoughts on any of these questions, please drop your answers in the chat too. We're just here talking ball. It's gonna be a little shorter of a show today. I'm planning to be on about another 5 minutes. If questions run in, we'll bump that up to 10 minutes. But again, I think if you have someone, if you're someone who's been starting Michael Wilson, you've been very happy with the production, especially with Marvin Harrison out. I think you continue to start him, especially with the good matchup against Atlanta. For the tight end position, like I mentioned, I think I do think Tyler Warren has a little bit of a bounce back. I think George Kittle probably sees the end zone this week. So if you're a George Kittle owner, start him. I'll ride Kyle Pitts for this week with a great matchup at Arizona. He had 7% of his career fantasy points scored in his 5th year last week. Of course, he's not going to have another 180-yard 3-touchdown game. But the matchup against Arizona is awesome for tight ends. It's obvious that without Drake London, Kirk Cousins is kind of zoned in on Kyle Pitts being the guy. He showed some awesome run after the catch. So I think moving forward with Kyle Pitts is fine. I think Brock Bauer is kind of a get back game, as we know how good that Houston pass rush is and how good that those cover corners are. Like if Kenny Pickett or Geno Smith or who's ever starting in this game is not getting time to throw, those long developing routes to those Trey Tuckers, to those jackbacks are not going to develop much. So that speaks to Brock Bowers. Excuse me. That speaks to Brock Bowers, working the middle of the field, just get the ball in his hands, and we know how much of an animal he is with the ball in his hands after the catch. So I think Brock Bowers has a little bit of a bounce back game. I think you can start him confidently. Not that you were not going to, but he's a guy that can really do it all this week. For quarterbacks, you're starting. I think you're starting. Lamar Jackson is an interesting one because New England's been awesome against the pass this year. But I think the Bills kind of showed, that you can beat them by, not necessarily throwing to outside receivers, but working tight ends and working running back, something that I don't think Lamar Jackson's afraid to do. I think we see, some Keaton Mitchell. I think we see some more Rashawn Ali in this game as a receiving back, actually. And I think we see, a lot of Mark Andrews in this game. So I don't, we saw Josh Allen, use his legs a little bit with the Ravens kind of in crunch territory, you do what you do best, and that's Lamar Jackson running the ball. I know injuries aside, but if the Ravens really want to win this game and get to the playoffs, Lamar Jackson is going to have to use his legs a little bit. So I think like if you're in a spot where you have to start Lamar Jackson, I think you're fine. Um, it hasn't been great, and it sucks because I'm as big as a fan as anyone for Lamar Jackson. I just want to see him, get those 15 rushes for 150 yards in a touchdown game. But maybe those days, at least this year, it feels like those days are behind us. With that being said, I think I'm out of here for the night. I appreciate all the questions. I appreciate everyone tuning in and talking some ball. We're in the semifinals of most leagues. Some leagues are in a championship. Some leagues are in a 2-week championship. Um, so as we move forward, good luck to everybody. If you have any more questions, leave them after the fact. We will get to all questions. We'll be back tomorrow talking about the Green Bay Packers with three Green Bay Packers fans. I think Packers are one of the more interesting teams in the NFL right now. They looked unbeatable, and then top 5 player in the NFL in Michael Parsons goes down with an ACL injury. Where does that really leave them? We'll hit on all that. An incredibly huge matchup with the Chicago Bears. That's really for the division that this year, this week. So that'll be a fun show to be on. And then as always, Thursday will be our final thoughts before the season, before the week starts. That's really where it's our bread and butter. We're coming to ask all your last second questions. Come and help. What will help fill lineups. So as I log off here, appreciate everyone watching, and we will see you tomorrow. Peace.